The dollar bill trembled in her tiny fist as the crowd's laughter cut through the frozen air. "Nobody wants that mutt," someone sneered. But 6-year-old Sophie wasn't listening. She was staring into the eyes of a dog everyone called dangerous, a scarred German shepherd shaking behind rusted bars, seconds away from being dragged to the back room where unwanted animals disappeared forever. "He has my daddy's eyes," she whispered, and something inside that broken soldier dog stirred for the first time in months. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the very end of this incredible journey. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far Sophie's story travels. The cold bit through Sophie's purple jacket as her mother pulled her toward the barn exit, but the child's feet had stopped moving. Sarah Carter felt the resistance and tugged harder. "Sophie, we need to go. Now." "Mommy, wait." "I said now." But Sophie's eyes were locked on the cage in the corner where the German shepherd sat motionless. His head lowered, his body pressed against the back wall as if trying to disappear. The auction was ending. People were collecting their purchases: chickens, goats, a spotted pig that squealed in a young boy's arms. Everyone was leaving and nobody had bid on the dog in cage 23. The auctioneer, a thick-necked man named Dutch, wiped his forehead with a stained handkerchief. "Last call on lot 23, he announced without enthusiasm. "Military K9, 8 years old, starting bid $1. Silence. "Anyone?" More silence. Dutch glanced at his assistant, a younger man holding a clipboard. "Mark it down. Nobody wants him." Sophie's hand shot up, clutching her crumpled dollar bill. "Mommy, I want—" Sarah grabbed her daughter's wrist and pulled it down. "No, absolutely not." "But Mommy—" "Sophie, that dog is dangerous." "You don't know that." "Look at him. He's covered in scars. He's traumatized. He could hurt you." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "He looks like Daddy." Sarah's breath caught. The words hit her like a fist to the chest. She looked at the dog again, really looked this time, and felt something twist inside her. The way he sat, the way he held himself despite being broken. The same exhausted nobility she'd seen in her husband's eyes during his last leave 3 weeks before the convoy explosion that killed him. "Sophie, baby, please don't do this. He needs us, Mommy. We can't afford—" "I have $1. You said $1 could buy things." "Not a dog. Dogs need food vet care shots." "Then I won't ask for birthday presents or Christmas presents. Please, Mommy, please." Dutch's voice boomed again. "Final call. $1 for lot 23. Going once." Sophie pulled free from her mother's grip and ran forward, her small boots slipping on the hay-covered concrete. "Wait, I'll buy him." The entire barn fell silent. Heads turned. The crowd, maybe 30 people still lingering, stared at the tiny girl waving a dollar bill over her head. Dutch frowned. "Kid, you don't want that dog." "Yes, I do. He's not a pet. He's a working dog that can't work anymore. You understand what that means? It means everyone gave up on him." Someone in the crowd laughed. A woman in a fur-lined coat whispered to her husband, "This is ridiculous." Dutch scratched his jaw. "Lady," he called to Sarah, who had reached Sophie and was trying to pull her back again. "You really want to do this?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, at the determination burning in those 6-year-old eyes, and felt her resistance crumbling. She thought about Michael, about how he used to say that the best soldiers weren't the ones who never fell, they were the ones who got back up. "How much are the vet bills going to be?" Sarah asked quietly. "More than you can afford," Dutch said flatly. "Dog's got PTSD, probably has joint problems, needs specialized care." "That's not what I asked," Dutch sighed. "Fine, it's your funeral. $1. Take him." The crowd murmured disapproval as Sophie practically vibrated with joy. She pressed her dollar into Dutch's calloused hand and turned toward the cage. Sarah grabbed her shoulder. "Wait, let me go first." Sarah approached the cage slowly, her paramedic training kicking in. She'd dealt with traumatized people before she knew the signs. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the concrete floor and his breathing was shallow, controlled. "Hey boy," Sarah said softly. "We're going to get you out of here, okay?" Nothing. She reached for the cage door. Dutch called out, "Ma'am, I'd use the catch pole if I were you. He's unpredictable." "He's scared," Sarah replied. "There's a difference." She opened the cage door. The metal hinges screamed in protest. The dog Ghost, according to the tag hanging from his collar, tensed but didn't move. Sarah knelt down, making herself smaller, less threatening. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're not going to hurt you." Ghost's eyes flickered up for just a second, meeting hers, and Sarah saw it, the intelligence, the pain, the crushing weight of abandonment. This dog had served, had saved lives, and this was his reward. Sophie appeared beside her mother, ignoring Sarah's sharp intake of breath. The little girl knelt in the dirty hay, her purple jacket dragging on the ground, and reached out one small hand. "Don't," Sarah started, but Sophie was already touching Ghost's scarred muzzle. The dog flinched. His whole body went rigid. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought he might snap, might lunge, might prove everyone right. But then Ghost did something unexpected. He leaned into Sophie's touch, just slightly, just enough. The little girl smiled through her tears. "Hi, Ghost. I'm Sophie. You're coming home with us." And for the first time in 8 months since the day his handler died, and he'd been marked as surplus military equipment, Ghost's tail moved. Just once. Just a tiny wag. But it was enough. The truck ride home was silent, except for the sound of tires crunching through snow-packed roads. Ghost sat in the truck bed, secured with a rope Sarah had borrowed from Dutch, his fur crusted with ice. Sophie kept turning around to look at him through the rear window, her small hand pressed against the cold glass. "Mommy, he's shaking." "I know, baby. We're almost home." "Can he come inside?" Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Their apartment was small, barely big enough for 2 people, let alone a 70-pound German Shepherd with behavioral issues. Their landlord, Mr. Kowalski, had a strict no-pets policy. They were already behind on rent. "We'll figure it out," Sarah said, which wasn't really an answer. When they pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, Mrs. Chen from 2B was taking out her trash. She stopped mid-step when she saw Ghost in the truck bed. "Sarah, what is that?" "A dog, Mrs. Chen." "I can see it's a dog. Why is it in your truck?" "Sophie adopted him." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. "Kowalski's going to lose his mind. You know the rules." "I know." "That's a military dog, isn't it? I can see the tattoo on his ear." Sarah hadn't noticed the tattoo. She looked back at Ghost, who was staring at Mrs. Chen with hollow eyes. The woman took a step back. "Sarah, that dog looks dangerous." "He's not dangerous. He's traumatized." "That's the same thing when it comes to animals." Sophie had already jumped out of the truck and was lowering the tailgate. Ghost didn't move. He sat perfectly still, like he was waiting for orders that would never come. "Come on, Ghost," Sophie said, gently patting her leg. "Come on, boy." Nothing. Sarah joined her daughter. "He doesn't know us yet, Soph. Give him time." "How do we get him down?" "Good question." Sarah studied the dog. He was trained, that much was obvious from his posture, his controlled breathing, his absolute stillness. Military dogs responded to commands, but Sarah didn't know the commands. She tried the basics. "Come." Ghost didn't move. "Here, boy." Nothing. "Down." Still nothing. Sophie tugged on her mother's jacket. "Mommy, try Daddy's words." Sarah's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "The army words, the ones Daddy used to say on the phone." Sarah's heart cracked a little. Sophie remembered. Of course she remembered. She'd been 4 years old when Michael deployed for the last time, and she'd memorized every phrase he'd used during their video calls. Sarah searched her memory. Michael had worked with military dogs during his first deployment. He'd come home with stories about a Belgian Malinois named Butch, who could detect IEDs from 50 yards away. He'd taught Sophie some of the basic commands. What were they? Sarah closed her eyes, hearing Michael's voice in her head. "It's German," he'd said. "Most military dogs are trained in German or Dutch. Makes them harder to control if they fall into enemy hands." German, Sarah tried to remember. "Here." Ghost's head snapped up. "Higher," Sarah repeated, her voice stronger now. "Come here." The dog rose to his feet, his movements stiff and painful, and walked to the edge of the tailgate. He sat down, waiting. Sophie gasped. "Mommy, you did it!" Sarah helped Ghost down, and the moment his paws touched the frozen pavement, he moved to her left side and sat again, pressed against her leg. The position was automatic, ingrained from years of training the handler's side. Mrs. Chen watched from a safe distance. "You're making a mistake, Sarah." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but it's my mistake to make." Getting Ghost into the apartment was easier than Sarah expected. The dog followed German commands without hesitation. "Here sits Bleib," and within minutes they had him inside the small living room. Sophie had already spread a blanket on the floor and was patting it enthusiastically. "This is your bed, Ghost. Do you like it?" Ghost stood in the center of the room, looking around with what Sarah could only describe as confusion. His ears were pinned back, his tail low, his body language screaming discomfort. "He doesn't understand," Sarah said quietly. "He's been in cages and kennels for months. He doesn't know what a home is anymore." Sophie's face fell. "But this is his home now." "I know, baby, but we have to let him figure that out on his own." Sarah had seen this before, not with dogs, but with soldiers. Men and women who came back from war and couldn't adjust to civilian life, who sat in corners at parties scanning for threats that didn't exist, who flinched at car backfires and couldn't sleep without checking the locks 3 times. Ghost was exhibiting every symptom. Sarah grabbed her phone and started researching. Within minutes, she'd found articles about canine PTSD. Yes, it was real. Yes, it was common in military dogs. No, there wasn't much help available. Most dogs were either euthanized or lived out their days in shelters. "Mommy, he won't eat." Sarah looked up. Sophie had poured kibble into a bowl, dog food Sarah had picked up at the gas station on the way home, but Ghost was ignoring it. He was still standing in the same spot, rigid and alert. "He's not hungry yet," Sarah lied. The truth was, Ghost probably didn't trust the food, didn't trust them, didn't trust anything. Sophie sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and looked up at Ghost. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to eat if you don't want to. But can you sit with me?" Ghost's eyes moved to the little girl, and something flickered in them. Recognition, maybe, or memory. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, and finally lowered himself to the floor about 3 feet from Sophie. Not close, but not far either. Sophie beamed. "See, Mommy, he likes me." Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Yeah, baby, I think he does." The first night was hell. Ghost wouldn't sleep. He paced the apartment for hours, his nails clicking on the cheap linoleum, his breathing heavy and labored. Every time Sarah started to drift off, she'd hear him moving, checking windows, checking doors, checking corners. At 2 in the morning, she gave up and went to the living room. Ghost was standing at the window, staring out at the snow-covered parking lot, his body tense. "Can't sleep either, huh?" Sarah said. Ghost didn't acknowledge her. Sarah sat down on the couch and wrapped herself in a blanket. "I don't know what you've been through," she said quietly, "but I know what it's like to lose someone, to have your whole world ripped apart and not know how to put it back together." Ghost's ear twitched. "My husband died 10 months ago. IED in Afghanistan. They sent me a flag and a medal and told me he was a hero." Sarah's voice cracked. "But you know what I don't want, a hero. I want Michael back. I want Sophie to have her dad back." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She's the one who insisted we take you, said you have her daddy's eyes. And you know what? She's right. You do." Ghost turned his head just slightly and looked at her. "So here's the deal," Sarah continued. "I don't know how to help you. I don't know the first thing about dogs, especially military dogs with PTSD. But Sophie believes in you. And if my 6-year-old daughter has that much faith, then I'm willing to try." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, a widow and a war dog, both broken in different ways, both trying to figure out what came next. Then Ghost did something that made Sarah's breath catch. He walked over to the couch and laid down at her feet. Not on the couch, not next to her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. It was a start. By morning, the apartment complex was buzzing. Mrs. Chen had apparently told everyone about the dangerous military dog in 3A, and by the time Sarah left for her shift at the hospital, 3 different neighbors had knocked on her door to complain. "Mr. Kowalski's going to evict you," warned Mr. Patterson from 3C. "That dog's going to hurt someone," insisted young Marco from downstairs. "You're being irresponsible," scolded Mrs. Rodriguez, the self-appointed complex matriarch. Sarah listened to each complaint with forced patience, then closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Sophie asked from the kitchen table where she was eating cereal. "No, baby. People are just scared. Of Ghost. Of what they don't understand." Sophie thought about this, her spoon hovering over her bowl. Daddy used to say people are scared of lots of things they don't understand, like different countries and different languages. Your daddy was a smart man. He also said the best way to stop being scared is to learn. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. He said that too, didn't he? Sophie nodded and went back to her cereal. Ghost was lying under the table, his head resting on his paws. He hadn't eaten yet, but he'd drunk some water, which Sarah considered a victory. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor at the hospital. "Can you pick up an extra shift this weekend?" Jameson called in sick again. Sarah stared at the message. They needed the money desperately. The rent was due in 5 days, and she was already $200 short. But extra shifts meant leaving Sophie with Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Chen had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with Ghost. Another text double time. "Please, Sarah. We're drowning here." Sarah typed back, "I'll be there." She looked at Sophie, who was now on the floor, showing Ghost a drawing she'd made a stick-figure girl and a stick-figure dog under a smiling sun. "Look, Ghost, this is us. See, we're happy." Ghost's tail moved. Just slightly. Just enough. And Sarah thought maybe, just maybe, they would be. The knock came at 7 p.m. while Sarah was heating up canned soup for dinner. She knew who it was before she opened the door. Mr. Kowalski stood in the hallway, his belly straining against a stained undershirt, his face red with anger. "We need to talk." "Mr. Kowalski, you got a dog." "Yes, you know the rules. No pets. Says so right in your lease." "I know, but..." "No buts. Get rid of it or get out." Sophie appeared behind her mother, her eyes wide. "Please, don't make us get rid of Ghost." Kowalski's expression softened slightly when he saw the little girl, but his voice remained firm. "Rules are rules, kid. Your mom signed a lease." "But he's a good dog. He's a hero." "A hero?" Kowalski snorted. "That thing's a liability. Mrs. Chen said it's military. Probably got PTSD or something. Next thing you know, it'll snap and bite someone and I'll get sued." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "His name is Ghost. And he's not an it. He served our country. I don't care if you serve tea to the Pope. No pets means no pets. I'll pay extra." Kowalski's eyebrows rose. "Extra. $50 a month. Pet deposit. You're already behind on rent. I'll catch up. I'm picking up extra shifts." Kowalski studied her, calculating. 100 extra per month. And you're responsible for any damage. Any complaints from other tenants, and you're out. No second chances. $100. Sarah's mind raced, trying to figure out how to make the math work. She was already barely scraping by. But Sophie was looking up at her with those hopeful eyes, and Ghost was standing behind them, both silent and still, and Sarah thought about Michael and what he would say. "Deal," Sarah said. Kowalski grunted. "Fine, but I'm watching you." As he walked away, Sophie threw her arms around her mother's waist. "Thank you, Mommy." Sarah hugged her daughter tight and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. The next morning, Sarah woke to silence. The apartment was completely quiet. No clicking nails, no heavy breathing, no movement at all. Panic seized her chest. Ghost! She jumped out of bed and rushed to the living room. Empty. The kitchen was empty. The bathroom was empty. Sophie! Sarah ran to her daughter's room and threw open the door. Sophie was asleep on her narrow bed, curled up under her Disney princess blanket. And lying on the floor beside her, his body positioned between the bed and the door, was Ghost. The dog's eyes opened when Sarah entered, but he didn't move. Didn't get up. He was on guard, protecting Sophie while she slept. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight since Michael's funeral. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she knelt beside the dog. "You're watching over her," she whispered, "just like her daddy would have." Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor. Sarah reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and rested her hand on his scarred head. He flinched but didn't retreat. "Thank you," Sarah said. "Thank you for being here." And in that moment, in that small bedroom with morning light streaming through the curtains, Sarah understood something she hadn't before. Ghost hadn't just been saved by Sophie's dollar. Sophie had been saved by Ghost's presence. They were healing each other. The week that followed was a crash course in chaos. Ghost wouldn't eat regular dog food, so Sarah had to experiment with different brands, different flavors, different textures. He refused to go outside unless Sophie came with him, which meant Sarah had to wake her daughter at 5:30 every morning for preschool bathroom breaks. He had nightmares, violent thrashing episodes where he'd whimper and kick and cry out in sounds that didn't seem like they could come from an animal. The first time it happened, Sarah thought he was dying. She'd called an emergency vet who'd charged her $200 just to tell her there was nothing physically wrong. "It's trauma," the vet said. "He's reliving whatever happened to him overseas. Best thing you can do is be patient and make him feel safe." Patient. Right. Sarah was running on 4 hours of sleep, working double shifts and fielding constant complaints from neighbors who swore Ghost was going to murder them all in their beds. But Sophie never wavered. Every morning she'd wake up and kiss Ghost's nose. Every afternoon she'd come home from school and read to him from her picture books. Every night she'd make sure his blanket was spread out perfectly and his water bowl was full. "Mommy Ghost likes it when I read to him," Sophie announced one evening. "Watch." She opened a book, something about a caterpillar eating through various foods, and started reading aloud. Ghost, who had been pacing by the window, stopped. His ears perked up. He walked over to Sophie and laid down beside her, his head resting on his paws. Sarah watched in amazement. "How did you know that would work?" Sophie shrugged. "Daddy used to read to me on the phone. It made me feel better when I was sad. I thought maybe it would work for Ghost too." 6 years old, Sarah thought. Her daughter was 6 years old and had more emotional intelligence than most adults. "You're pretty smart, you know that." Sophie grinned. "I know." The first real test came on a Tuesday. Sarah was at work when her phone rang. Sophie's school. Her heart dropped. "Ms. Carter, this is Principal Williams. There's been an incident." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Is Sophie hurt?" No, she's fine. But we need you to come pick her up. There was an altercation." An altercation? Sophie had never been in trouble at school. Ever. Sarah left work immediately, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When she arrived at the school, Sophie was sitting in the principal's office. Her arms crossed, her face set in a stubborn expression Sarah recognized from Michael. "What happened?" Sarah asked. Principal Williams, a stern woman in her 50s, folded her hands on her desk. "Sophie got into a physical confrontation with another student." "Sophie doesn't fight." "Apparently today she did. She pushed Tyler Morrison off the playground equipment." Sarah looked at her daughter. Sophie's jaw tightened. "He said Ghost should be put down." "He what?" Principal Williams sighed. "Tyler's mother is Mrs. Morrison from your apartment complex. She's been telling Tyler that Sophie's dog is dangerous. Tyler repeated it at recess, and Sophie, well, she defended the dog. By pushing another kid, he said Ghost was going to kill someone." Sophie's voice cracked. He said we were stupid for keeping him. He said—" She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "He said Ghost was worthless." And there it was. The word that cut deeper than any other. Worthless. The same word people had used at the auction. The same word Sophie had fought against from the moment she saw Ghost in that cage. Sarah knelt in front of her daughter. "Baby, I'm proud of you for defending Ghost, but we can't push people, even when they're wrong. But he was being mean. I know, but there are other ways to handle mean people." "Like what?" "Good question." Sarah looked at Principal Williams, who was watching this exchange with interest. "Like proving them wrong," Sarah said finally. "Ghost isn't worthless. He's not dangerous. He's a hero who's been through something terrible. And the best way to show people that is by letting Ghost show them himself." Sophie wiped her eyes. "How?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." Principal Williams cleared her throat. "Sophie's suspended for the rest of the day. I'm sorry, Ms. Carter, but we have a zero-tolerance policy for physical violence." Sarah nodded. "I understand." As they walked to the car, Sophie's hand clutched tight in hers. Sarah's mind was already working. Principal Williams was right. They needed to prove Ghost wasn't dangerous. But how? The answer came from an unexpected source. When they got home, there was a flyer stuck to their apartment door. Sarah pulled it off and read, "Community meeting, Thursday 7 p.m. Re-dangerous dog in Building 3. All residents encouraged to attend." Mr. Kowalski, presiding. Sophie read over her shoulder. "Mommy, what does that mean?" Sarah crumpled the flyer in her fist. "It means we're going to a meeting." "Are they going to make us get rid of Ghost?" "Not if I have anything to say about it." But as Sarah unlocked the door and Ghost greeted them with his usual careful distance, she wondered if words would be enough. The whole complex had turned against them. One misstep, one scare, one moment of Ghost acting out, and they'd be evicted. Sophie went straight to Ghost and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I won't let them take you away." Ghost's tail wagged, and Sarah prayed her daughter was right. Thursday came too fast. Sarah spent 2 days preparing, researching, making phone calls. She contacted the VA, the military, the German Shepherd Rescue Organization. She gathered Ghost's service records, his medical history, everything she could find to prove he wasn't a threat. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, Sarah felt as prepared as she could be. The community room was packed. Every chair was filled and people lined the walls. Sarah recognized most of them neighbors she'd smiled at in passing, people who'd seemed friendly before. Now they looked at her like she'd brought a bomb into the building. Mr. Kowalski stood at the front of the room, his expression grave. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the situation in apartment 3A. Sarah stood holding Sophie's hand. Ghost was at home, secured in the apartment with extra locks and a baby monitor, so Sarah could hear if anything went wrong. "Before anyone says anything," Sarah started, "I'd like to explain—" "There's nothing to explain," Mrs. Morrison interrupted, standing up. "You brought a violent military dog into a family building. My son goes to school with your daughter and he's terrified." "Ghost has never shown aggression toward anyone," Sarah countered. "Yet," Mr. Patterson added, "military dogs are trained to kill." "They're trained to protect," Sarah shot back. "There's a difference. You can't guarantee he won't snap. Can you guarantee your kid won't snap? Should we ban children too?" The room erupted in angry voices. Mr. Kowalski banged his fist on the table. "Order, everyone, please." Sophie tugged on Sarah's hand. "Mommy, are they going to take Ghost away?" Sarah knelt down, ignoring the crowd. "No, baby, I promise." But even as she said it, she could feel the tide turning against them. These people had made up their minds before they walked into the room. Then someone spoke from the back, a voice Sarah didn't recognize. "I served with military dogs in Iraq." Everyone turned. A man in his 40s with a beard and a slight limp stepped forward. Sarah had seen him around the complex but never talked to him. "My name's Marcus Webb. I live in 2D, and I want to say something about these dogs." Mr. Kowalski nodded. "Go ahead." Marcus cleared his throat. I was an army ranger, did 3 tours, and I watched these dogs save lives every single day. They cleared buildings, detected explosives, found wounded soldiers. They did jobs that humans couldn't do. That doesn't mean they're safe, Mrs. Morrison argued. You're right, Marcus agreed. They're not safe. They're dangerous to enemies, to threats, to anyone trying to hurt their pack. But you know what else? They're the most loyal creatures on the planet. Once they bond with someone, they'll die before letting harm come to that person. He looked at Sophie. This little girl bought that dog for $1. You know what that tells me? It tells me she saw something everyone else missed. And maybe instead of trying to get rid of the dog, we should be asking ourselves why a 6-year-old has more compassion than a room full of adults. Silence. Sophie's eyes were wide. You know Ghost? Not personally, Marcus said, but I know dogs like him. And ma'am, he looked at Sarah, if you ever need help with him, I'm in 2D. I know the commands, I know the training, and I know what these dogs need to heal. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Mr. Kowalski shifted uncomfortably. That's all well and good, but we still have residents who are concerned. Then let them meet him, Sarah said suddenly. Let Ghost prove himself. How? Someone called out. I don't know yet, but give us a chance. One chance to show you he's not what you think he is. The room buzzed with conversation. Some people shook their heads. Others looked thoughtful. Finally, Mr. Kowalski sighed. 1 month. You've got 1 month to prove that dog is in a danger. 1 incident, 1 complaint, and he's gone. Understood? Sarah nodded. Understood. As the meeting dispersed, Marcus approached her. That was brave, he said. But you know you just put a target on your back, right? I know. People will be watching, waiting for him to mess up. Then we won't mess up. Marcus smiled slightly. You remind me of my handler. She was stubborn, too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. Call me if you need anything. I mean it. Sarah took the card gratefully. As they left the community room, Sophie squeezed her hand. Mommy, we're going to prove them wrong, right? Right, baby. How? Sarah looked down at her daughter, at the absolute faith shining in those young eyes, and made a decision. I have no idea, she admitted. But we'll figure it out together. When they got back to the apartment, Ghost was waiting by the door, his body tense, his eyes alert. The moment he saw Sophie, he relaxed. Sophie ran to him and hugged his neck. We did it, Ghost. We bought us 1 month. Ghost's tail wagged, and for the first time since they'd brought him home, he licked Sophie's face. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, exhausted but determined. 1 month. 30 days to prove that a broken dog and a grieving family could heal each other. 30 days to show the world that worth wasn't measured in dollars or medals or perfect behavior. 30 days to save Ghost's life. The clock was ticking, and Sarah Carter had no idea how they were going to win. But as she watched her daughter laugh with the dog everyone called dangerous, she knew one thing for certain. They weren't giving up without a fight. The month started with a notebook and a plan that felt more like desperation than strategy. Sarah sat at the kitchen table at midnight, her 3rd cup of coffee going cold, while Ghost lay at her feet and Sophie slept down the hall. She'd drawn a calendar marked each day with potential tasks, exercises, anything that might prove Ghost was safe. Day 1, basic obedience in the hallway. Day 5, interaction with another resident. Day 10, controlled meeting with a child. Day 30, community demonstration. She stared at the words until they blurred. Who was she kidding? She wasn't a dog trainer. She was a paramedic working 60-hour weeks trying to keep her head above water, and Ghost was a military asset with more trauma than she knew how to handle. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Webb. Saw your light on. You okay? Sarah texted back. Making a plan. Probably a terrible one. 3 dots appeared then. Come to 2D tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Bring Ghost. Sarah looked down at the German shepherd who had lifted his head at the sound of her phone. His eyes were alert, intelligent, waiting. What do you think, boy? Should we trust him? Ghost's tail thumped once. Yeah, Sarah whispered. Me too. Morning came too fast. Sophie was still asleep when Sarah clipped the leash onto Ghost's collar and led him downstairs. The apartment building was silent, most residents still in bed, which meant fewer chances for someone to complain or panic. Marcus opened his door before Sarah could knock. He was dressed in running gear, his prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. Ghost's ears perked forward, and his entire body changed posture, straightening, head-lifting eyes, focusing. "He recognizes you," Sarah said, surprised. "Not me specifically. The energy, the stance." Marcus knelt down slowly, not making direct eye contact. "Hey, soldier, at ease." Ghost didn't move, but Sarah could feel the tension drain from the leash. Marcus stood. "How much German do you know?" "Here sits Bleib, that's about it." "That's a start. But if you want to prove he's trained and controllable, you need the full command set. Fuss for heel, Platz for down, Aus for release." He pulled out a worn notebook. I wrote them down. Phonetic spellings, common situations, emergency recalls. Sarah took the notebook like it was a lifeline. "Why are you helping us?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Because I watched good dogs get abandoned after they saved our asses. Got wounded, got PTSD, got tossed aside like broken equipment. My handler's dog Duchess took shrapnel meant for 6 of us. Lived through it, but the brass said she was too expensive to treat. They put her down 3 weeks later." His voice cracked. "I couldn't stop it. But maybe I can stop it from happening to him." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Training's going to be hard. You'll be exhausted. Sophie will get frustrated. Ghost will have bad days. And those vultures waiting for you to fail, they'll be watching every second." "I know. Good. Then let's get started." For the next 2 hours, Marcus walked Sarah through the basics. How to give commands with authority. How to read Ghost's body language. How to correct without punishment, guide without force. Ghost responded to Marcus immediately, years of military conditioning kicking in. But with Sarah, he hesitated. Tested boundaries, looked confused. "He doesn't see you as his handler yet," Marcus explained. "You're pack, but you're not alpha. That takes time." "How much time?" "Depends on the dog. Duchess bonded with her handler in a week. Some dogs take months." He watched Ghost carefully. "But this one, he's looking for someone to follow, someone to trust. You just have to prove you're worth it." By the time Sarah got back to the apartment, she was drenched in sweat despite the cold. Sophie was awake eating cereal in her pajamas, and Ghost went straight to her, his person, Sarah realized. Not his handler. His reason. "Mommy, where were you?" "Training with Mr. Webb." Sophie's eyes widened. "The man from the meeting?" "Yeah, he's going to help us. Help us prove Ghost is good. Help us prove Ghost is great." Sophie grinned and hugged Ghost's neck. The dog leaned into her eyes half closed, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about keeping a dog anymore. This was about keeping Sophie's joy, keeping her faith intact, keeping her belief that good things could still happen in a world that had already taken so much. Sarah's phone rang. Work, another emergency. Another shift starting in an hour. "Mrs. Chen's coming to watch you," Sarah told Sophie, already grabbing her bag. "Can Ghost stay with me?" Sarah hesitated. Mrs. Chen had made her feelings about Ghost very clear. But what choice did she have? "I'll talk to her." Mrs. Chen arrived 15 minutes later, her expression pinched. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Ghost. "Sarah, I told you." "I know what you told me, but I don't have another option. I need you to watch Sophie and Ghost stays with Sophie. That's non-negotiable." Mrs. Chen's jaw tightened. "If that dog so much as growls at me, he won't." "You can't promise that." "Actually, I can. Watch." Sarah turned to Ghost and gave the command Marcus had taught her. "Platz." Ghost dropped to his belly immediately, eyes on Sarah. "Bleib." Ghost froze, not moving a muscle. Mrs. Chen stared. "How did you—" "He's trained. He's controlled. and he's not dangerous unless someone threatens Sophie. Sarah grabbed her jacket. I'll be back by 6. There's money on the counter for pizza. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. She left before the older woman could argue. But as she drove to the hospital, guilt gnawed at her. What if something went wrong? What if Ghost had an episode? What if Mrs. Chen's fear triggered a response? Her shift was brutal. 2 car accidents, 1 cardiac arrest, 1 kid who'd fallen through ice at the lake. By the time Sarah got home at 7, an hour late, because of course she was running on fumes and adrenaline. She burst through the door expecting chaos. Instead, she found Mrs. Chen sitting on the couch reading a magazine while Sophie and Ghost napped together on the floor. Mrs. Chen looked up. He didn't move for 4 hours. What? After you left, that dog laid down next to Sophie and didn't move. Not even when I dropped a pan in the kitchen. He just watched me calm as anything. She stood gathering her things. I still think you're crazy for keeping him. But I'll admit, he's not what I expected. After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah sat on the floor next to her sleeping daughter, and the dog who'd somehow managed to prove himself to the neighborhood's harshest critic. She ran her hand over Ghost's scarred head, and he opened one eye tail wagging slowly. 1 down, Sarah whispered. 29 days to go. The next week was a blur of work training and small victories. Marcus came by every morning at 6 drilling commands until Sarah's voice was hoarse and her patience thin. Ghost was learning, adapting, remembering. But more than that, he was bonding. With Sophie, he was gentle, letting her dress him in scarves, sitting still while she practiced braiding his fur, following her from room to room like a shadow. With Sarah, he was obedient but distant, still waiting for something she couldn't quite give him. He needs to see you as a leader, Marcus said one morning after a particularly frustrating session where Ghost had ignored Sarah's recall 3 times in a row. I am a leader. I'm a single mother raising a kid on my own. That's not what I mean. In his world, leaders are decisive, confident, unflinching. You second-guess yourself every time you give a command. Because I don't know if I'm doing it right? Then fake it. These dogs respond to energy, not accuracy. You could be saying the wrong German word, but if you say it like you mean it, he'll listen. Sarah wanted to argue, but he was right. She could feel it every time she gave a command, the hesitation, the uncertainty, the fear that she was failing. That afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Sarah decided to test Marcus's theory. She took Ghost to the empty parking lot behind the building and unclipped his leash. Ghost looked at her, confused. They never trained off-leash. Fuss, Sarah commanded, her voice sharp and clear. Ghost moved to her left side immediately. They walked the perimeter of the lot, Sarah giving commands, Ghost obeying without hesitation. Sits, plots, bleib. Everyone executed perfectly, and with each command, Sarah felt her confidence growing, solidifying, becoming real. They were halfway through the session when a car pulled into the lot. Tyler Morrison and his mother. Mrs. Morrison's face went pale when she saw Ghost off-leash. Sarah, what are you doing? That dog could attack someone. Tyler hid behind his mother, eyes wide with fear. Sarah felt her carefully built confidence waver, but then Ghost looked up at her, waiting, trusting, and something in her snapped into place. He's not going to attack anyone, Sarah said calmly. Watch. Platz. Ghost dropped to his belly. Bleib. Ghost froze. Sarah walked 10 feet away, then 20, then 30. Ghost didn't move, didn't even twitch. Higher. Ghost sprinted to her side and sat, eyes locked on her face. Mrs. Morrison stared, speechless. Tyler peeked out from behind his mother. Is he a police dog? Military, Sarah said. He saved soldiers overseas. Like a hero. Exactly like a hero. Tyler took a tentative step forward. Can I pet him? Tyler, no. Mrs. Morrison started, but Sarah held up a hand. Ghost sits. Bleib. She looked at Tyler. Come here slowly. Let him smell your hand first. Tyler approached with the careful steps of a child who'd been told something was dangerous but was curious enough to test it. He extended his hand and Ghost sniffed it gently, then looked at Sarah for permission. Gut. Sarah said another German command Marcus had taught her. Good. Ghost's tail wagged and Tyler giggled. He's soft. He's also trained to protect. That means he'd never hurt someone unless they were trying to hurt his family. Mrs. Morrison was watching with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read, part fear, part wonder, part grudging respect. Tyler, come on. We need to get groceries. But as they got in their car, Tyler waved at Ghost through the window, and Sarah knew something had shifted. 2 down. That evening, Sarah got a call from Principal Williams. Her heart sank. Another incident. Ms. Carter, I wanted to follow up on Sophie's suspension. She's been perfect at home. No more pushing. I'm not calling about that. I'm calling because Tyler Morrison told his entire class that Sophie's dog is a hero. Apparently word spread and now half the first grade wants to meet Ghost. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry, what? I'm not saying you should bring him to school, that's against policy, but I thought you should know that Sophie's standing up for Ghost seems to have changed some minds. After hanging up, Sarah found Sophie and Ghost in the living room. Sophie reading aloud from a library book about space. Ghost's head was resting on her lap, his eyes half closed. Soph, guess what? Sophie looked up. What? Your classmates want to meet Ghost. Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Really? Does that mean people like him now? Some people. Not everyone. But it's a start. Sophie hugged Ghost tight. See, I told you they'd understand. Ghost's tail thumped against the floor and Sarah felt hope blooming in her chest, fragile, tentative, but real. The breakthrough came on day 14. Sarah was working a night shift when her phone exploded with calls. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Patterson, Marco from downstairs, even Mr. Kowalski. Her hands shook as she called back. Mrs. Chen, what's wrong? There was a break-in attempt. Building 2. Someone tried to get into the Martinez apartment. Sarah's blood ran cold. Is everyone okay? Yes, because that dog of yours, Sarah, he heard something. Started barking like crazy. Woke up half the complex, scared off whoever was trying to break in. Ghost did that. Marco saw him at your window. Said he looked like a different animal. Fierce. Protective. Mrs. Chen's voice softened. The police came. They said if Ghost hadn't made noise, the Martinez family might have been hurt. Sarah hung up and immediately called Marcus. Ghost stopped a break-in. Of course he did. That's what he's trained for. Threat detection, perimeter security, that's literally his job. But he was inside our apartment. How did he know military dogs can hear things we can't? Smell things we can't? He probably detected the intruder before anyone else in the building knew something was wrong. When Sarah got home at 7 a.m., there was a small crowd in the parking lot. Neighbors she'd never spoken to, people who'd avoided her since the community meeting, all waiting. Mr. Patterson stepped forward. We owe you an apology. That dog Ghost, he saved the Martinez family last night. We were wrong about him, added Marco. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. We judged too quickly. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. Thank you. That means thank you. When she got upstairs, Sophie was already awake, sitting with Ghost, who looked exhausted but proud. The little girl threw her arms around her mother. Mommy, Ghost is a hero, everyone says so. Sarah knelt and hugged them both. Her daughter and the dog everyone had called worthless, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. They weren't fighting anymore. They'd won. Almost. Because the next morning Mr. Kowalski knocked on their door with an expression that made Sarah's stomach drop. We need to talk, he said. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. What now? What had gone wrong? The Martinez family wants to thank Ghost personally, Kowalski continued. And the Homeowners Association is voting tonight on making him the official building guard dog. Means you wouldn't have to pay the pet deposit anymore. Means he'd be recognized as a working animal. Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Sophie jumped up and down. Does that mean Ghost can stay forever? Kowalski's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Yeah, kid, I think it does. After he left, Sarah sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. 2 weeks ago, they'd been fighting for Ghost's life. Now he was being honored as a hero. Marcus stopped by that afternoon with a six-pack of beer and a knowing grin. Heard the news. Told you he'd prove himself. I can't believe it happened this fast. Believe it. These dogs, when they're given a chance, they show you exactly what they're capable of. He opened a beer and handed it to Sarah. You did good. Both of you. Sophie was teaching Ghost a new trick, rolling over, and the sight of them together laughing and playing made Sarah's chest ache with gratitude. But that night, after Sophie was asleep, and Ghost was patrolling his usual route through the apartment, Sarah found herself staring at the calendar she'd made. They still had 16 days left in the trial period. 16 days for something to go wrong, and something in her gut told her it wasn't over yet. The warning came from an unexpected source. Sarah was grabbing mail from the lobby when she overheard two men talking by the elevator. She didn't recognize them, probably visiting someone in the building. Yeah, my cousin said there's a military dog here. Worth good money if you know the right buyers. Military dogs get shipped, don't they? Doesn't matter if you sell them out of state. Black market for trained dogs is huge. Security companies, private contractors, even dog fighters pay top dollar. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She ducked behind the mailboxes as the men got on the elevator, her mind racing. Someone was talking about stealing Ghost. She ran upstairs and called Marcus immediately. We have a problem. After she explained what she'd heard, Marcus swore. Those weren't visitors. That was reconnaissance. They were sizing up the building, figuring out schedules, access points. What do I do? First, you don't let Ghost out of your sight. Second, you call the police and report what you heard. Third, he paused. Third, you prepare Ghost for what he was trained to do. What does that mean? It means if someone tries to take him, he needs to know he has permission to defend himself. Right now, he's in pet mode, docile, obedient, safe. But he's got another mode, a mode that kept soldiers alive in war zones. Sarah felt sick. You want me to turn him into a weapon? I want you to remind him that he's allowed to protect himself. There's a difference. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to every sound. Ghost was restless too, pacing, checking windows, his training kicking in, even though he didn't know the specific threat. Sophie was oblivious, sleeping soundly with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Sarah made a decision. At midnight, she got up and went to where Ghost was standing guard by the front door. She knelt beside him and spoke in the firm, clear voice Marcus had taught her. Ghost, pass off. Watch out. Be alert. Ghost's ears swiveled toward her, his body tensing. Beschützen. Protect. Ghost's eyes locked on hers, and Sarah saw it, the shift from pet to soldier, from companion to guardian. This was the dog who'd saved lives, who'd faced down enemies, who'd never backed down from a fight. If someone comes for you, Sarah whispered, if someone tries to take you or hurt Sophie, you fight. You hear me? You do whatever it takes. Ghost's tail wagged once, and Sarah knew he understood. She just prayed they'd never need to find out. The police came the next day to take her statement. They said they'd increase patrols in the area, watch for suspicious activity. But Sarah knew how this worked. She'd seen it enough times in the ER. By the time police responded to danger, it was usually too late. She called in sick to work something she never did, and spent the day reinforcing locks, checking windows, making sure Ghost had clear sight lines to every entrance. Marcus brought over a dog whistle and a panic button. Whistles for emergencies. He'll hear it from anywhere in the building and come running. Panic button alerts building security and me. This is insane. We're treating my apartment like a fortress. Better insane than sorry. Sophie came home from school full of stories about her day, oblivious to the tension crackling through the apartment. She did her homework at the kitchen table while Ghost lay at her feet, and Sarah tried to pretend everything was normal. But when bedtime came and Sarah tucked Sophie in, the little girl grabbed her hand. Mommy, is something wrong? Sarah's heart clenched. What makes you think that? You keep looking at the door, and Ghost is acting weird. Is someone going to try to take him away? Sarah couldn't lie to her daughter. Some bad people might try, but we're ready. Ghost is ready, and we're not going to let anything happen. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to lose him. You won't. I promise. It was a promise Sarah had no business making, but she'd rather die than break it. Nothing happened that night. or the next night, or the night after that. Sarah started to wonder if she'd overreacted, if the conversation she'd overheard was just talk, nothing serious. But on day 19, everything went to hell. Sarah was working a late shift when Mrs. Chen called, her voice shaking. "Sarah, someone tried to break into your apartment." Sarah's heart stopped. "Is Sophie okay?" "She's fine, she's with me." But Ghost, Sarah Ghost, attacked them. Attacked who? Two men. They were trying to pick your lock. Ghost must have heard them because he started barking, and when they forced the door open, Mrs. Chen's voice cracked. "Sarah, I've never seen anything like it. He was vicious, terrifying. He drove them out of the building." "Where is he now?" "In your apartment. He won't let anyone near, not even me. He's guarding the door." Sarah left work immediately, her hands shaking so hard she could barely drive. When she got to the apartment building, there were 2 police cars in the parking lot and a small crowd of residents. Marco ran up to her. "Sarah, thank God. That dog of yours, he's incredible. Saved your daughter's stuff, maybe saved other apartments too. Those guys were pros." Sarah pushed through the crowd and ran upstairs. Her apartment door was splintered, hanging half open. She could see Ghost inside, standing in the middle of the living room. His hackles raised a low growl rumbling from his chest. "Ghost," Sarah called softly. "Higher." Ghost's head whipped toward her, and the growling stopped. He ran to her, pressing against her legs, trembling. "Good boy," Sarah whispered, running her hands over him, checking for injuries. "Such a good boy." A police officer approached. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about the dog." "He defended his home. That's what he's supposed to do." "We understand. But the neighbors reported he was aggressive. He was protecting my daughter's home from intruders. That's not aggression. That's heroism." The officer looked uncomfortable. "The men got away, but we found blood on the doorframe. Your dog bit at least one of them." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Good." By the time the police left and Sarah had collected Sophie from Mrs. Chen's apartment, it was past midnight. Sophie ran to Ghost and hugged him tight, crying into his fur. "You saved our home," she sobbed. "You saved everything." Ghost licked her tears away, gentle again, the soldier retreating back into the companion. But Sarah had seen what he was capable of, what he'd always been capable of. And she understood now why the military had valued these dogs so highly. They weren't pets. They were warriors who'd chosen to love. The next morning, the apartment building was buzzing with the story. Ghost had gone from tolerated pet to building legend overnight. People brought treats, toys, even offered to help pay for a new door. Mr. Kowalski showed up with a carpenter. "New doors on the house, and I talked to the association. They voted unanimously. Ghost is officially our guard dog. Full benefits, no restrictions." Sarah wanted to cry from relief and exhaustion. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, thank him." Kowalski nodded at Ghost. "That dog earned his place here." Marcus came by in the afternoon with news. Police caught the guys. They're part of a ring that steals trained dogs and sells them. They had a whole list of targets: military dogs, police canines, expensive breeds. Ghost was on it. How did they know about him? Social media, probably. Someone saw Sophie's school project about him, the one she posted online, and tracked you down. Sarah felt sick. She'd been so focused on proving Ghost was safe that she'd never considered someone might see him as valuable enough to steal. "It's over now," Marcus said. "They're facing serious charges. Breaking and entering, attempted theft, assault. They're not getting out anytime soon." "What about Ghost? Will there be legal issues?" "Are you kidding? The police want to give him a medal, a military dog defending his home from criminals. That's a PR dream." And sure enough, 2 days later, a reporter from the local news showed up asking to do a story. Sarah almost said no, but Sophie was so excited that she couldn't refuse. The segment aired that weekend. Hero Dog Saves Family Stops Burglary Ring. It showed Ghost sitting calmly beside Sophie, showed the neighbors praising him, showed the broken door and the police report. It showed the world what Sarah had known from the moment Sophie handed over that crumpled dollar bill. Ghost was never worthless. He just needed someone to see his worth. The final week of the trial period passed in a blur of interviews, community meetings, and celebrations. The Martinez family brought over a cake. Tyler Morrison asked if Ghost could come to his birthday party. Mrs. Chen knitted Ghost a sweater. On day 30, Sarah woke up to find Ghost sleeping on the floor beside Sophie's bed like always. But this time when she walked in, Ghost lifted his head and looked at her with something new in his eyes. Trust. Complete, absolute trust. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "We actually did it." That evening, the apartment complex held a gathering in the community room. Someone had made a banner, "Congratulations, Ghost, official building guardian." There was food, music, and more people than Sarah had ever seen in one place. Mr. Kowalski raised his glass. 30 days ago, we almost made a terrible mistake. We almost let fear win. But this little girl, he nodded at Sophie. She saw something we didn't, and she was right. Everyone cheered. Sophie stood up, holding Ghost's leash, her voice small but clear. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving Ghost a chance. He's not scary. He's not dangerous. He's just a good boy who needed a home." Ghost's tail wagged and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. They'd done it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every doubt, they'd done it. Later that night, after the party had ended and Sophie was asleep, Sarah sat on the couch with Ghost's head in her lap. Marcus had stopped by with a final gift. Ghost's military medals, the ones from his service overseas. "Found them in the military database," Marcus explained. "Figured he should have them back." Sarah ran her fingers over the metal Bronze Star, Purple Heart Combat action ribbon. Ghost had earned every one of them, saving lives, protecting soldiers, serving his country. And now he was here in a small apartment protecting a 6-year-old girl and her widowed mother. "You know what the crazy part is?" Sarah said. "Everyone thought we saved him. But I think he saved us." Marcus smiled. "That's what these dogs do. They give everything they have, even when they have nothing left." After Marcus left, Sarah looked at Ghost. Really looked at him. The scars were still there. The trauma was still there. But something else was there too. Peace. "Welcome home, soldier," Sarah whispered. Ghost's tail thumped against the couch, and somewhere in the quiet apartment a little girl slept safely, dreaming of heroes who came in unexpected forms. And a dog who'd been worth only $1 had become priceless. The morning after the celebration, Sarah woke to silence, the kind that made her heart race before her brain caught up. She threw off the covers and ran to Sophie's room, but the bed was empty. Panic seized her chest until she heard laughter from the kitchen. Sophie was sitting on the floor in her pajamas, Ghost's head in her lap, reading him the ingredients off a cereal box. "And it has riboflavin, which I think is a vitamin, and also BHT to maintain freshness, whatever that means." Ghost's tail thumped steadily against the linoleum. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her racing heart slowing. "Morning, you two." Sophie looked up, grinning. "Mommy Ghost likes learning about cereal." "I'm sure he does." Sarah poured coffee, her third cup, before 7 a.m. and tried to ignore the exhaustion pulling at her bones. The past month had aged her 5 years, but they'd won. Ghost was safe. They could finally breathe. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Ms. Carter, this is Janet Reynolds from Channel 7 News. We'd like to do a follow-up story on Ghost the hero dog who stopped the burglary ring. Would you be available for an interview?" Sarah's first instinct was to say no. They'd done one interview already and the attention had been overwhelming. But before she could answer, Sophie appeared at her elbow. "Is that about Ghost? Are we going to be on TV again?" The hope in her daughter's voice made the decision for her. "Yes, we're available." The interview was scheduled for that afternoon, which meant Sarah had to call in sick to work again. Her supervisor was understanding everyone had seen the news, but Sarah could hear the strain in her voice. The hospital was understaffed and every missed shift put more pressure on her coworkers. "I'll make it up," Sarah promised, knowing she couldn't. There weren't enough hours in the day. The news crew arrived at 3, turning their small apartment into a production set. Lights, cameras, sound equipment. Ghost watched it all with calm detachment, his military training keeping him steady, even when a boom microphone swung too close to his head. Janet Reynolds was a polished woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a voice that put Sophie immediately at ease. "So Sophie, tell me, when you saw Ghost at that auction, what made you want to help him? Sophie thought carefully, her small face serious. He looked like my daddy, sad but brave. Janet's expression softened. Your father was military. He died in Afghanistan. Sophie said it matter-of-factly the way children do when they've rehearsed a painful truth so many times, it's lost its sharp edges. Mommy says he was a hero. I think Ghost was a hero too, but everyone forgot. And you didn't forget. No, because heroes are still heroes even when they're hurt. Sarah's throat closed up. 6 years old, and Sophie understood something most adults never learned. The interview continued, but Sarah barely heard it. She was watching Ghost, who had positioned himself between Sophie and the camera crew. His body relaxed, but his eyes alert. Always protecting, always ready. When the crew finally left, Sophie was buzzing with excitement. Mommy, do you think a lot of people will see it? Maybe, baby. Do you think it'll help other dogs like Ghost? Sarah knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. I hope so. The segment aired that evening, and within an hour, Sarah's phone was ringing nonstop. Friends from her old life, distant relatives, even Michael's army buddies calling to say they'd seen the story. But one call stood out. Ms. Carter, this is Colonel Richard Hayes from the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program. I saw your interview and I need to talk to you about Ghost. Sarah's blood ran cold. Why? Ghost was never officially retired. According to our records, he was transferred to a holding facility pending evaluation. Someone signed off on his disposal without proper authorization. Disposal. The word tasted like poison. Euthanasia. But clearly that didn't happen. Someone diverted him to that auction instead. We're launching an investigation. Sarah felt sick. What does this mean for Ghost? That depends. Technically, he's still military property. But given the circumstances and the publicity around his case. Hayes paused. Let's just say the department would like to avoid a PR nightmare. If you're willing to officially adopt him and sign the transfer papers, we can make this go away quietly. And if I'm not willing, then we'd be required to reclaim him and place him in an approved military dog retirement program. Sarah's hands were shaking. He stays with us. I thought you'd say that. I'll have the papers drawn up. But Ms. Carter, there's something else you should know. Ghost's handler, Sergeant David Torres, didn't just die. He was killed trying to protect Ghost during an ambush. The dog was supposed to be evacuated, but Torres refused to leave him behind. He died buying time for Ghost to be pulled out. Sarah closed her eyes, grief and gratitude twisting inside her. Sophie needs to know that. I think Torres would have wanted her to. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the dark living room trying to process everything. Ghost had been meant to die. Someone had broken protocol to give him a chance at the auction, knowing he'd probably be bought for nothing or put down anyway. That someone had saved his life, and now they had to honor that gift. Sarah found Sophie already asleep. Ghost curled on the floor beside her bed. She knelt and whispered to the dog, "Your handler loved you enough to die for you, and we're going to make sure that sacrifice wasn't for nothing." Ghost's eyes opened, meeting hers in the darkness, and Sarah swore she saw understanding there. The next morning brought unexpected snow, thick, heavy flakes that turned the city white within hours. Sophie pressed her face to the window, delighted. "Mommy, can we take Ghost outside? He's never played in snow with us." Sarah looked at the dog, who was watching the window with interest. "I don't know if he likes snow, Soph. Everyone likes snow." They bundled up and headed outside, Ghost walking calmly at Sarah's side. But the moment his paws hit the fresh powder, something changed. His ears perked up, his tail started wagging, and suddenly he was bounding through the snow like a puppy kicking up white clouds, his mouth open in what could only be described as a smile. Sophie shrieked with laughter and chased after him, falling face first into a drift. Ghost immediately circled back, checking on her, licking the snow off her face. "He's playing Mommy. Ghost is playing." Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. This was the dog Ghost, should have been joyful, carefree, whole. War had stolen that from him, but somehow, impossibly, he was finding it again. They stayed out for an hour building a snowman that Ghost immediately destroyed by knocking its head off. Sophie declared it the best snowman ever destroyed, and Sarah laughed harder than she had in months. But when they came back inside shaking snow from their coats, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway with a grave expression. Sarah, you have a visitor. I told him to wait in the community room. Who? He said his name is David's father. I didn't want to let him in your apartment without asking first. Sarah's heart stopped. Torres. Sergeant Torres' father. She left Sophie with Mrs. Chen and went downstairs with Ghost at her heels. In the community room sat an older man, maybe 60, with the same strong features she'd seen in the military photo Colonel Hayes had emailed her. He stood when she entered. Ms. Carter, I'm Robert Torres. I'm so sorry about your son. Robert's eyes were red-rimmed but dry, like he'd run out of tears months ago. I saw the news. Saw Ghost. I had to come. I'm glad you did. They told me he was dead. After David, after my son died, they said the dog didn't make it either. His voice cracked. I grieved for both of them. Ghost had gone very still, staring at the man with intense focus. Robert noticed. He remembers me. I visited David on base once. Met Ghost then. He knelt slowly, extending his hand. Hey boy, remember me? Ghost approached cautiously, sniffed Robert's hand, and then something extraordinary happened. The dog pressed his head against Robert's chest and made a sound Sarah had never heard before, a low, mournful whine that sounded heartbreakingly human. Robert wrapped his arms around Ghost and sobbed. My son loved you so much. He talked about you in every letter, every phone call. You were his best friend. Sarah had to look away, her own tears blurring her vision. When Robert finally pulled himself together, he looked at Sarah with raw gratitude. Thank you for saving him. David would have... He stopped, composed himself. He would have been so grateful. My daughter saved him. She saw something everyone else missed. Can I meet her? Sarah brought Sophie down, and the little girl with the intuition children sometimes have immediately hugged Robert. Your son was Ghost's daddy, she said simply. That makes you Ghost's grandpa. Robert laughed through his tears. I suppose it does. He stayed for an hour, telling them stories about David and Ghost's service together, how they'd cleared buildings in Kandahar, how Ghost had detected an IED that would have killed a dozen soldiers, how David used to sneak Ghost extra treats and let him sleep on his cot even though it was against regulations. He sent me a video once, Robert said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Said he wanted me to meet his partner. He pressed play, and there was David Torres, young, smiling alive, with Ghost sitting proudly beside him in full tactical gear. Dad, this is Ghost. Best military working dog in the regiment. Also the most stubborn, food-obsessed, and loyal creature I've ever met. If anything happens to me, promise you'll make sure he gets taken care of. Promise me, Dad. The video ended. Robert looked at Ghost, then at Sophie. I couldn't keep that promise. The military told me he was gone. But you did. You kept my son's promise for me. Before he left, Robert pressed an envelope into Sarah's hand. It's not much, but I want to help. For Ghost's food vet bills, whatever you need. Sarah tried to refuse, but Robert insisted. Please, let me do this. Let me feel like I'm still taking care of my son's best friend. After he left, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. Thank you for giving Ghost the life David wanted him to have. Sarah sat down hard, overwhelmed. Sophie appeared with Ghost. Mommy, why are you crying? Because good people still exist, baby. Even when the world makes you think they don't. The money solved their immediate financial crisis, but it created a new problem. People started calling, emailing, showing up at the apartment. Veterans who'd worked with military dogs, families who'd lost soldiers, organizations wanting Ghost to be a spokesperson for PTSD awareness. Everyone wanted a piece of their story. Sarah tried to manage it all while working her shifts at the hospital, helping Sophie with homework, training Ghost, and keeping the apartment from falling into complete chaos. She was running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee, and it was starting to show. One morning, she snapped at Sophie for spilling juice. I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't mean to. Just go get ready for school, now. Sophie fled, and Sarah immediately felt like the worst mother in the world. She cleaned up the juice with shaking hands, exhaustion and guilt crushing her chest. Ghost appeared at her side, pressing against her leg. "I'm fine," Sarah said, but her voice broke. "I'm fine. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. She was drowning. Marcus found her that evening sitting on the floor of the apartment staring at a wall of unanswered emails. Sophie was at Mrs. Chen's and Ghost was lying with his head on Sarah's lap. "You look like hell," Marcus said bluntly. "Thanks. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Sarah couldn't remember. Marcus sat down beside her. "You can't do this alone. You're going to burn out." "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do. Let people help. That veterans group that contacted you, they're offering free support services. The Therapy Dog organization wants to train Ghost and Sophie for school visits. They'll handle the logistics. You don't have to carry all of this yourself. But Ghost is our responsibility. And you're keeping that responsibility by accepting help. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." Sarah wanted to argue, but she was too tired. "I don't know how to let go." "Start small. One thing. One person. One decision." Sarah looked at Ghost, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes, and remembered what Sophie had said at the interview. Heroes are still heroes even when they're hurt. Maybe that applied to her too. She called the veterans group the next morning and said yes. Yes to support. Yes to help. Yes to not doing this alone. Within a week, her life transformed. The veterans group connected her with a therapist who specialized in PTSD, not just for Ghost, but for her and Sophie too. Grief counseling for families of fallen soldiers. They needed it. God, they needed it. The Therapy Dog organization started training Ghost and Sophie for school visits. Turned out Ghost was phenomenal with kids, patient, gentle, intuitive. Sophie glowed with pride every time a child hugged Ghost and said they weren't scared anymore. Sarah even accepted an offer from the hospital to reduce her hours in exchange for becoming the staff trainer for PTSD awareness. It meant less money, but it also meant being home for Sophie. Being present. Being alive instead of just surviving. But just when things were stabilizing, winter hit hard. The city was buried under 2 feet of snow, and temperatures dropped to dangerous lows. The hospital called Sarah in for emergency duty mass casualties from a highway pileup, and she had no choice but to go. "Mrs. Chen will stay with you," Sarah told Sophie, already pulling on her coat. "But Mommy, it's scary outside." "I know, baby, but people need help." Sophie hugged Ghost tight. "We'll be okay. Right. Ghost." Ghost's tail wagged, but Sarah could see the tension in his body. He knew something was wrong. The instincts that had kept him alive in war zones were screaming danger. "I'll be back as soon as I can," Sarah promised. The hospital was chaos, broken bones, hypothermia, one critical head injury. Sarah worked on autopilot, starting IVs, stabilizing patients, running between beds. She was in the middle of helping with a trauma when her phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen. Her heart dropped. "Sarah, the power went out in the building." "What?" "Transformer blew. They're saying it could be hours before it's fixed. The heat's off and it's getting cold fast." Sarah looked at the controlled chaos around her. She couldn't leave. They were understaffed as it was. "Bundle Sophie up. Use all the blankets. I'll get there as soon as I can." "Sarah, there's something else. Mr. Kowalski is evacuating the building, sending everyone to the emergency shelter downtown. But they won't take Ghost. No pets allowed." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What?" "I tried to explain he's a service animal, but the shelter has strict rules. Sophie won't leave without him." "Put her on the phone." Sophie's voice was small and scared. "Mommy, they want us to leave Ghost here alone. I can't do that." "Baby, listen to me." "He'll be cold, Mommy. He'll be scared. I can't leave him." Sarah's mind raced. The apartment would be freezing within hours. But the shelter wouldn't take Ghost, and she couldn't force Sophie to abandon him. She looked at her supervisor, who was watching her with exhausted sympathy. "Go," her supervisor said. "Family first." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. The drive home was terrifying ice everywhere, visibility almost zero. When she finally made it to the apartment, most of the building was already evacuated. Mrs. Chen met her in the hallway, wrapped in 3 coats. "Sophie's in the apartment with Ghost. She refused to leave." Sarah found her daughter sitting in the dark living room, bundled in every blanket they owned, with Ghost pressed against her side. The temperature had already dropped noticeably. "Mommy." Sophie ran to her and Sarah caught her in a fierce hug. "We're going to figure this out," Sarah said, but she had no idea how. They couldn't stay here. It was too cold and getting colder, but they couldn't go to the shelter, and Sarah's car barely made it through the streets as it was. Then her phone rang. "Marcus. I heard about the power. Pack up, you're coming to my place. I've got a generator and a fireplace." "Marcus, you don't have to." "Sarah, I have heat and space. Get your family and that dog over here now." By the time they made it to Marcus's apartment across town, Sophie's lips were tinged blue, and Ghost was shivering violently. Marcus had the fireplace roaring and hot chocolate waiting. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by his kindness. "That's what soldiers do," Marcus said simply. "We take care of our own." They spent that night huddled around the fire, Sophie curled up with Ghost on a pile of blankets, while Sarah and Marcus talked in low voices about war and loss and the strange ways life brought people together. "David Torres saved Ghost's life," Sarah said, "and now Ghost is saving ours. Not from bullets or bombs, but from grief, from giving up." Marcus nodded. "That's what these dogs do. They remind us why we fight." By morning, the power was back on, and they could return home. But something had shifted between them, Sarah, Marcus, Sophie, and Ghost. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were family. The incident made the new single mother refuses to abandon Hero Dog during emergency, and suddenly Sarah was fielding calls from politicians wanting to change shelter policies. Within a month, legislation was proposed to allow service animals in emergency shelters. Sophie was ecstatic. "We changed the rules, Mommy. Other people won't have to choose anymore." But Sarah knew the real change wasn't in the laws. It was in Sophie's eyes, which no longer held the haunted grief they'd carried since Michael's death. It was in Ghost's body, which no longer tensed at every sound. It was in Sarah's heart, which had somehow learned to hope again. One evening, as Sarah was tucking Sophie into bed, her daughter grabbed her hand. "Mommy, do you think Daddy knows about Ghost?" Sarah's throat tightened. "I think he knows." "Do you think he's happy we found him?" "I think he's proud of you for being brave enough to see what everyone else missed." Sophie smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep, Ghost on the floor beside her bed, as always. Sarah sat there for a long time watching them. Her daughter and the dog who'd been worth only $1. The dog who'd been marked for death. The dog who'd become their salvation. The world had tried to throw Ghost away, but Sophie had said no, and that no had changed everything. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights glittering in the cold. Somewhere out there, other dogs were waiting in cages. Other children were grieving losses they didn't understand. Other families were drowning in circumstances they couldn't control. She couldn't save them all. But maybe she didn't have to. Maybe one dog, one child, one family at a time was enough. Maybe that's how you change the world, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of stubborn love. Sarah turned back to where Sophie and Ghost slept peaceful and safe, and felt something settle in her chest. Purpose, direction, hope. They'd survived the winter. Now it was time to help others do the same. The idea came to Sarah at 3 a.m, which was becoming her unofficial thinking hour. She was sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee and a pile of bills, when Ghost patted over and rested his chin on her knee. "What if we started something?" she whispered to him. "What if we helped other dogs like you?" Ghost's tail wagged once and Sarah grabbed a notebook. By sunrise, she had a rough plan sketched out. By the time Sophie woke up, Sarah was on the phone with Marcus. "A rescue program," Sarah explained, her words tumbling over each other. "Specifically for retired military and police dogs. We find them, rehabilitate them, match them with families who understand what they need." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "That's ambitious. That's necessary. Ghost almost died because nobody cared enough to save him. How many others are out there right now? Hundreds, maybe thousands." "Exactly. So we start with 1, then 2, then 10. We grow it." "You'll need funding," Space, volunteers, legal paperwork. Sarah, this isn't something you can just, I have to try. I have to do something with what we've been given. Another pause. Then Marcus said, when do we start? Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You're in. I'm in. But we need help. Real help. The help came from unexpected places. Robert Torres, David's father, offered to be their first major donor. The veterans group connected them with lawyers who volunteered to handle the nonprofit paperwork. Mrs. Chen surprisingly offered her nephew, who ran a construction company, to help renovate a space. Within 6 weeks, they had a plan, a name, Second Chance K9, and a tiny office in a converted warehouse on the edge of town. Sophie was beyond excited. Mommy, we're going to save so many dogs. We're going to try baby. Like I saved Ghost. Sarah knelt and pulled her daughter close. Exactly like you saved Ghost. But the reality was harder than Sarah anticipated. The first dog they rescued, a Belgian Malinois named Ranger with 3 legs and violent nightmares, nearly destroyed their entire setup in the first week. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, and lunged at anyone who came near, except Ghost. This was a mistake, Sarah said, after Ranger broke through a window at 2 in the morning. We're not equipped for this. Marcus was bandaging a cut on his arm from trying to stop Ranger. Every rescue is going to be hard. That's why they need us. What if we can't help him? Then we find someone who can, but we don't give up. Sarah looked at Ghost, who was sitting calmly near Ranger's crate, not approaching but not leaving either. The Belgian Malinois was pacing agitated, but every time he glanced at Ghost, he seemed to settle slightly. Ghost is helping him, Sophie said from the doorway. She wasn't supposed to be up, but Sarah was too tired to scold her. He's showing Ranger it's okay. And she was right. Over the next 3 days, Ghost became Ranger's anchor. Wherever Ghost went, Ranger followed. When Ghost ate, Ranger ate. When Ghost slept, Ranger finally allowed himself to rest. It's like Ghost is teaching him how to be a dog again, Marcus observed. On the 4th day, a family came to meet Ranger, a veteran named Tom McCarthy, who'd lost his leg in Iraq, and his wife, Linda, who worked with PTSD patients. They'd heard about Second Chance K9 through the military network. We want a dog who understands what Tom's going through, Linda explained. Someone who gets it. Tom approached Ranger's crate, slowly moving with the deliberate care of someone who knew trauma intimately. Hey, buddy. I heard you've had a rough time. Ranger growled low, but Tom didn't back away. I get it. I was angry too. Still am some days. But you know what? That anger doesn't have to be forever. He sat down cross-legged on the floor, his prosthetic leg clearly visible. Ranger's growling stopped. He moved to the front of the crate, sniffing the air. Yeah, I'm broken too, Tom said quietly. But broken doesn't mean useless. Broken just means we've survived something that tried to destroy us. Ranger whined a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. Tom extended his hand through the crate bars. What do you say? Want to be broken together? Ranger licked his hand. Linda was crying. Sarah was crying. Even Marcus looked suspiciously emotional. Within 2 weeks, Ranger was living with the McCarthys and thriving. Tom sent daily updates, photos of Ranger sleeping on the couch, videos of him playing fetch in their yard, messages about how Ranger alerted before Tom's panic attack started. You saved him, Tom called to tell Sarah. You gave him back his purpose. You gave him a home, Sarah replied. That's what saved him. But hanging up, Sarah felt something shift inside her. This was working. They were actually making a difference. The second rescue was easier. A German Shepherd mix named Dakota, who just needed time and patience. The third was a nightmare, a Rottweiler named Bear, who'd been abused after leaving military service and trusted no one. I don't know if we can help him, Sarah admitted after Bear bit through his 4th leash. Sophie, who'd been doing homework at the warehouse office, looked up. That's what people said about Ghost. Ghost was different. How? Sarah started to answer and realized she couldn't. Bear wasn't different. He was just further down the same road Ghost had walked. Okay, Sarah said. We keep trying. It took 2 months, but eventually Bear bonded with a firefighter named Jackson, who'd lost his partner in a building collapse. Jackson had the patience of a saint and the quiet strength that Bear desperately needed. "He reminds me of my partner," Jackson told Sarah when he picked up Bear. "Rough around the edges, but loyal to the core." Bear left with Jackson, and Sarah felt like they'd pulled off a miracle. Word spread fast. Within 6 months, Second Chance K9 had rescued and rehomed 15 dogs. The warehouse was barely big enough, so they expanded into the building next door. Volunteers started showing up, other veterans, dog trainers, families whose lives had been touched by military working dogs. Sarah quit her hospital job entirely to run the organization full-time. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what she needed to be doing. But success brought new problems. One morning, Sarah arrived at the warehouse to find a woman waiting outside with a scared-looking Labrador retriever. "I heard you help military dogs," the woman said desperately. "But my dog, she's not military. She was a breeding dog at a puppy mill. Can you help her anyway?" Sarah looked at the lab, who was trembling so hard her whole body shook, and thought about rules and mission statements and staying focused. Then she thought about Ghost and Sophie and that crumpled dollar bill. "Bring her inside," Sarah said. That opened the floodgates. Soon they were getting calls about all kinds of dogs, abuse cases, hoarding situations, dogs scheduled for euthanasia at overcrowded shelters. Sarah tried to stay focused on military dogs, but every time she turned away a case, she felt like she was failing. "We can't save them all," Marcus reminded her gently after Sarah broke down crying over turning away a senior pit bull with cancer. "Then what's the point?" Sarah shot back. "We save the ones we can save and ignore the rest. We save the ones we're equipped to save. That's not giving up, that's being realistic." But realism felt like cowardice. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Sarah got a call from an animal control officer 3 counties over. "I've got a dog here, German Shepherd, around 9 years old, former police K9. He's scheduled for euthanasia in 2 hours. Owner surrendered him because he got too old and expensive. You're my last hope." Sarah looked around the warehouse. They were at capacity. Every kennel was full. They didn't have space, didn't have resources, didn't have time. "I'm sorry," Sarah started to say, but then Sophie appeared at her elbow. "Is it a dog like Ghost?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "Then we have to save him. We have to." Sarah called Marcus. "I need you to clear out the supply closet. We're taking one more." The dog's name was Justice, and he looked like Ghost's older brother Gray, around the muzzle eyes, tired but still sharp. When they brought him into the warehouse, Ghost immediately went to him. The 2 dogs touched noses, and something passed between them that Sarah couldn't name but felt in her bones. Recognition, respect, solidarity. "He can stay in our apartment," Sophie declared, "until we find him a home." Sarah wanted to say no, they were already stretched thin. But looking at Justice and Ghost, standing together, 2 old soldiers who'd given everything and been discarded for their trouble, she couldn't refuse. Justice came home with them that night. The first week was chaos. Justice had accidents in the house, barked at every sound, and kept Sarah up all night pacing. But slowly, with Ghost's guidance, he settled. Started eating regularly. Started trusting that this wasn't temporary. Then came the day that changed everything. Sarah was at the warehouse when her phone rang. Sophie's school. Her heart dropped not again. "Miss Carter, this is Principal Williams. There's been an incident involving Sophie, but she's not in trouble. Someone else is." Sarah drove faster than she should have. When she arrived, Sophie was sitting in the principal's office with Ghost. They'd started bringing him to school as part of the therapy dog program, while another child, a boy around 8, sat across from them, sobbing. "What happened?" Sarah asked. Principal Williams explained, "Ryan here threatened to hurt himself. Said he was going to jump off the playground equipment. Sophie heard him and brought Ghost over. They've been sitting with him for 20 minutes. Sarah looked at her daughter, who was holding Ryan's hand while Ghost rested his head on the boy's lap. "He said nobody cared if he lived or died," Sophie said quietly. "I told him that wasn't true. I told him Ghost used to feel that way too, but then everything got better." Ryan looked up, his face blotchy from crying. "Your dog really felt like that. He felt like nobody wanted him. like he wasn't good enough anymore. But he was wrong. And you're wrong too. Sarah's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. Her 6-year-old daughter was talking a child down from suicidal thoughts using Ghost's story as proof that life could get better. Principal Williams called Ryan's parents, and Ryan was taken to a crisis counselor. But before he left, he hugged Ghost tight and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Sarah held Sophie close. "What you did today was incredibly brave." "I just told him the truth. Ghost taught me that sometimes people can't see hope anymore, so you have to show it to them." Sarah realized then that Second Chance K9 wasn't just about saving dogs. It was about saving people. The two were inseparable. She made a decision. The next week, Sarah launched a new program, Dogs with Purpose. Military and police dogs who'd been rescued would be trained as therapy dogs and paired with at-risk youth veterans with PTSD, anyone who needed proof that broken things could heal. The response was overwhelming. Within a month, they had a waiting list of 50 families. Within 3 months, they had to hire staff to keep up with demand. Within 6 months, Second Chance K9 had become one of the most successful rescue operations in the state. Sarah was exhausted, exhilarated, and running on pure adrenaline. Then the call came that made everything else pale in comparison. "Ms. Carter, this is Senator Patricia Walsh's office. The senator would like to meet with you about federal legislation regarding retired military working dogs." Sarah thought it was a joke. "I'm sorry, what?" "Senator Walsh saw your story on national news. She wants to sponsor a bill requiring proper retirement care for all military working dogs. She'd like you to testify before Congress." Sarah sat down hard. "Testify? Your story, Sophie's story, has captured national attention. The senator believes it could be the push needed to pass comprehensive protection laws." After hanging up, Sarah just stared at her phone. Congress, federal legislation, national impact. It was too big, too much. But then Sophie came home from school with Ghost and Justice trailing behind her, and Sarah thought about all the dogs still waiting in kennels and cages and kill shelters across the country. She called the senator's office back. "I'll do it." The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah had to learn policy language, work with lawyers on testimony, coordinate with veterans advocacy groups. Marcus took over day-to-day operations at Second Chance K9, while Sarah traveled to Washington for preliminary meetings. Sophie came with her, the senator insisted. "Her voice matters more than anyone's," Senator Walsh said. "She's the one who started all of this." The night before the hearing, Sarah couldn't sleep. She paced the hotel room, running through her testimony for the 100th time, while Ghost and Justice watched her with patient eyes. "What if I mess this up?" she whispered to them. "What if I can't find the right words?" Ghost came over and pressed against her leg, the same gesture he'd made 100 times when she needed comfort. "You're right," Sarah said. "The words don't matter as much as the truth. And the truth is simple: these dogs deserve better." The hearing room was intimidating, wood paneling, formal seating, cameras everywhere. Sarah's hands shook as she sat at the witness table. Sophie sat beside her in a chair that was too big, her feet dangling, with Ghost in his service vest sitting between them. Senator Walsh began. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. Can you tell us in your own words how you came to rescue Ghost?" Sarah took a breath and told the story. Not the polished version she'd rehearsed, but the real one. The auction, the dollar bill, the laughter. Sophie's whisper. "He has my daddy's eyes. My daughter saw worth where everyone else saw trash." Sarah said, her voice steady now. "A 6-year-old child had more compassion than a room full of adults. That should shame us. It should horrify us. These dogs give everything: their youth, their health, their lives, and we repay them by treating them like disposable equipment." One senator interrupted. "But Ms. Carter, the military has retirement programs. Programs with loopholes big enough to lose hundreds of dogs every year. Ghost was supposed to be in a program. Instead, he ended up in an auction barn being sold for $1. How many others fell through those same cracks?" The room was silent. Senator Walsh turned to Sophie. "Sweetheart, do you want to say anything?" Sophie looked terrified but nodded. She stood up barely tall enough to see over the microphone and spoke in a clear, strong voice. My daddy died fighting for our country. Ghost fought too. But Ghost lived, and people forgot about him. That's not fair. Heroes should be taken care of forever, not just when they're useful. Several senators were wiping their eyes. Sophie continued. When I gave my dollar for Ghost, everyone laughed. They said I was stupid. But I think they were stupid for not seeing how special he was. And I think grown-ups need to stop laughing and start helping. The hearing room erupted in applause, spontaneous and sustained. Senator Walsh was openly crying. The testimony went on for 2 more hours. Other veterans spoke. Dog handlers testified about the bonds they'd formed and the heartbreak of watching their partners discarded. By the end, even the most skeptical senators looked convinced. 3 months later, the Military Working Dog Retirement Act passed with bipartisan support. It required comprehensive retirement care, mandatory placement programs, and federal funding for organizations like Second Chance K9. Sarah watched the vote on TV with Sophie Marcus and a room full of volunteers at the warehouse. When the final count came in 96-4 in favor, everyone erupted in cheers. Sophie hugged Ghost. We did it. We changed the law. But Sarah was thinking about something bigger. They hadn't just changed a law. They'd changed hearts. They'd reminded people that worth wasn't measured in utility but in dignity. That service deserved honor. That loyalty deserved loyalty in return. Her phone rang. Senator Walsh. You did it, Sarah. You and Sophie changed the world. Sophie changed the world, Sarah corrected. I'm just helping her finish what she started. After hanging up, Sarah looked around the warehouse at the dogs in various stages of healing, at the volunteers working tirelessly at Marcus coordinating adoptions, at Sophie reading to a newly rescued shepherd who was still learning to trust. This had started with $1 and one little girl who refused to accept that a life could be worthless. Now it was a movement. The phone started ringing with interview requests, partnership offers, donation pledges. National news wanted another story. A publisher wanted to turn their story into a book. Sarah felt overwhelmed until she looked at Ghost, who was lying peacefully in the corner, his scarred body relaxed, his eyes clear. He'd been thrown away, marked for death, given up on, and now he was saving lives just by existing. That was the real miracle, not the legislation or the media attention or the accolades. The miracle was that love had been enough. That night, after everyone had gone home and the warehouse was quiet, Sarah sat on the floor with Ghost and Justice Sophie curled up asleep against her side. I still can't believe this is real, she whispered. Ghost's tail thumped. A year ago, we were barely surviving. Now we're changing the world. Justice leaned his gray muzzle against her shoulder. Michael would have loved you both. He would have been so proud of what we built. Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks. Not sad tears, but healing ones. The kind that washed away old wounds and made space for new growth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert Torres. David would have been proud too. Thank you for honoring his sacrifice. Sarah typed back, Ghost honors it every day just by being alive. She looked at her sleeping daughter, at the 2 old soldiers flanking them at the warehouse full of second chances, and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Complete. Whole. Home. They'd started with nothing but $1 and a dream. Now they had everything that mattered. The book deal came with strings attached. The publisher wanted a happy ending tied up with a bow, wanted Sarah to minimize the struggle and maximize the triumph. They wanted Ghost's story sanitized, made palatable for mass consumption. Sarah threw the contract across her kitchen table. I'm not doing it, she told Marcus over the phone. They want me to lie about how hard this was, about how many times I wanted to give up. Then don't sign with them. Find a publisher who gets it. What if there isn't one? Then we self-publish. Sarah, you've testified before Congress. You can handle a publishing company. But it wasn't about handling them. It was about protecting Ghost's truth, and by extension, Sophie's truth, and Michael's truth, and the truth of every broken soldier and broken dog trying to find their way home. Sarah found a smaller publisher who understood. The book would be raw, honest, and real. It would show the nightmares and the setbacks alongside the victories. It would honor the struggle. Sophie was 7 now, and old enough to understand what the book meant. Will you tell people about the bad parts too, like when Ghost had nightmares? Especially those parts. Good, because people need to know it's okay to be scared and still be brave. Sarah pulled her daughter close, marveling at the wisdom in someone so young. Sophie had grown up fast, too fast maybe, but she'd grown up strong. The manuscript took 4 months to write. 4 months of reliving every moment from that first day at the auction to the congressional hearing. Sarah wrote late at night while Ghost slept at her feet, his presence a reminder of why this mattered. When she finally typed the last sentence, she sat back and cried not from sadness, but from release. The book was called The Dollar Dog: How a Little Girl's Faith Saved a Hero's Soul. It published on a Tuesday in March, exactly 2 years after Sophie had bought Ghost at that auction. Sarah didn't expect much. Maybe a few local sales, maybe some interest from dog lovers. Instead, the book hit the New York Times bestseller list in its first week. The phone didn't stop ringing. Morning shows wanted interviews. Book clubs wanted Sarah to speak. Schools wanted to add it to their curriculum. The story had touched something deeper than Sarah realized, a nerve about value and dignity and second chances that resonated across the country. But fame was exhausting and invasive. Reporters camped outside their apartment. Strangers recognized Sophie at school. One aggressive photographer got too close to Ghost at the park, and the dog's protective instincts kicked in. Nothing violent, just a warning growl, but it made headlines anyway. Hero dog shows aggressive behavior. Sarah wanted to scream. One moment of Ghost being a dog, being protective, and suddenly the narrative shifted. People who'd never met him were calling him dangerous again. Sophie came home from school in tears. Tyler's mom said Ghost is going to hurt someone. She said we shouldn't have saved him. Sarah felt rage burning in her chest. Tyler's mom is wrong. But people are saying it, Mommy. They're saying mean things. Sarah called an emergency meeting at the warehouse with Marcus and their core volunteers. We need to address this before it spirals. One bad headline and we lose everything we've built. Marcus was blunt. You need to control the narrative. Do an interview, show people Ghost with Sophie. Show them the real story. I'm tired of interviews. I'm tired of having to prove Ghost's worth over and over. Then don't prove it, just live it. The solution came from an unexpected source. Ryan, the boy. Sophie had talked down from self-harm 2 years ago now, 9 years old and thriving in therapy, offered to speak publicly about how Ghost had saved his life. People need to hear from someone Ghost helped, Ryan's mother explained. Not just about what he did, but about what he is a lifeline. The press conference was held at the warehouse, surrounded by rescued dogs and the families who'd adopted them. Ryan stood at the microphone, small but steady. When I wanted to die, a dog showed me why I should live. Ghost didn't judge me. He didn't tell me to get over it. He just sat with me and let me feel what I needed to feel. That's not dangerous. That's love. One by one, other people stepped forward. Tom McCarthy with Ranger, who'd both overcome their PTSD together. Jackson with Bear, who'd both learned to trust again. A teenage girl with a rescued shepherd, who'd helped her cope with her father's deployment. By the end, reporters weren't asking about aggression anymore. They were asking about expansion, about how to start similar programs in their cities, about what it took to give broken things a second chance. The tide shifted again and Sarah could finally breathe. But the peace didn't last long. 3 weeks later, Sarah got a call from the Department of Defense. Ghost's case had triggered an audit of military working dog retirements across all branches. What they found was devastating. Hundreds of dogs lost in the system, inadequate record keeping, retired handlers, never notified that their partners were available for adoption. We need your help, Colonel Hayes said. We need Second Chance K9 to help us locate and place these dogs. It's a federal contract, full funding, but it means scaling up fast. Sarah looked around the warehouse, already bursting at the seams. How many dogs are we talking about? Conservative estimate 300 within the first year. Sarah's head spun. 300 dogs. That meant more staff, more space, more resources, more everything. I can't do this alone, she said. You won't have to. We're authorizing partnerships with rescue organizations nationwide. You'll be the coordinating hub, but the work will be distributed. Sarah hung up and immediately called an all-hands meeting. Staff, volunteers, board members, everyone crammed into the warehouse office. We've been offered a federal contract to help place 300 retired military dogs in the next year. Stunned silence. Then Marcus started laughing. 300? Of course. Why not? I can't make this decision alone, Sarah said. This affects all of us. It means longer hours, more pressure, higher stakes. If we fail publicly, and we damage the credibility of every rescue trying to do this work. One volunteer, a college student named Amy, who'd been with them from the beginning, spoke up. 2 years ago, you rescued one dog with $1. Now you're being asked to rescue 300. That's not failure waiting to happen. That's proof of concept. The vote was unanimous. They'd accept the contract. The next 6 months were the hardest of Sarah's life. They expanded into 3 more buildings, hired 20 full-time staff, coordinated with 40 partner organizations across 12 states. Dogs came in faster than they could process, some in good shape, others broken beyond anything Sarah had seen. She worked 18-hour days, slept in her office more often than not, and watched Sophie grow more independent out of necessity. Mrs. Chen had become a surrogate grandmother, picking Sophie up from school, helping with homework, making sure she ate dinner. Ghost and Justice divided their time between the apartment and the warehouse, both dogs seeming to understand that their work wasn't finished. Ghost in particular became the emotional support for newly arrived dogs, his calm presence helping them adjust his example, showing them that healing was possible. Sarah was in the middle of coordinating a transport from California when her phone rang. Sophie's school again. Her heart sank. Ms. Carter? Sophie collapsed during PE class. We've called an ambulance. The world tilted. Sarah was running before she'd fully processed the words, shouting instructions to Marcus as she grabbed her keys. The drive to the hospital was a blur of panic and prayer. Sophie was in the ER when Sarah arrived, pale and small, in the hospital bed hooked up to monitors. A doctor was checking her vitals. What happened? Sarah demanded. She fainted. We're running tests, but I need to ask, has she been eating regularly? Getting enough sleep? Sarah's stomach dropped. When was the last time she'd sat down for a meal with Sophie? Really paid attention instead of being distracted by work calls and emails. Yes, I think so. Mom, I need you to be sure. Has Sophie's routine changed recently? Has she been under unusual stress? Sarah thought about the past 6 months. The expansion, the constant chaos, the nights she'd come home too exhausted to do more than kiss Sophie goodnight. I've been working a lot, Sarah admitted, her voice cracking. I've been so focused on saving dogs that She couldn't finish. The guilt was crushing. Sophie stirred, opening her eyes. Mommy! Sarah grabbed her daughter's hand. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm sorry I scared you. Don't apologize. Never apologize. The doctor returned with test results. Sophie's severely anemic and showing signs of malnutrition. When was her last full physical? Sarah couldn't remember. 8 months, a year. She needs immediate intervention, iron supplements, dietary changes, and I'm strongly recommending regular checkups. This didn't happen overnight, Ms. Carter. This is cumulative neglect. The words hit like a slap. Neglect. She'd been so busy saving everyone else's children through dogs with purpose that she'd neglected her own. Sophie was admitted overnight for observation and IV fluids. Sarah didn't leave her side, canceling meetings, ignoring calls, letting the warehouse operate without her for the first time in months. Marcus showed up at midnight with coffee and a hard truth. You're burning out. We all see it. I can't slow down. We have 300 dogs depending on us. And you have 1 daughter depending on you. Sarah, which one matters more? Sarah wanted to argue that it wasn't that simple, that she could do both, that she had to do both. But looking at Sophie's pale face, the monitors beeping steadily, she knew Marcus was right. What do I do? She whispered. You delegate. You trust your team. You remember why you started this in the first place. Sarah thought back to that moment in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, Ghost's chin on her knee, the idea taking shape. She'd wanted to help dogs like Ghost, but she'd started Second Chance K9 for Sophie to give her daughter's faith and compassion a place to flourish, to honor the lessons Sophie had taught her about seeing worth where others saw nothing. And now she was failing the very person who'd inspired it all. Sophie came home the next day with strict orders, regular meals, adequate sleep, reduced stress. Sarah made changes immediately. She hired an executive director to handle day-to-day operations. She cut her hours in half. She started leaving her phone in another room during dinner. The first week was agony. Every instinct screamed at her to check in, to micromanage, to control every detail. But slowly she learned to let go, and discovered something surprising: the organization ran better without her constant interference. Her team was competent, passionate, and fully capable of handling the work. Sophie recovered quickly once properly nourished and rested. But the scare had changed something fundamental in Sarah. She'd spent 2 years proving that broken things could be fixed, that neglected souls could heal, that worth existed independent of utility. She'd just forgotten to apply those lessons to herself. One evening, Sarah was making dinner, actually cooking, not microwaving, when Sophie came home from school with Ghost Justice trailing behind. "Mommy, we learned about heroes today in class." "Yeah. What did you learn?" "Mrs. Patterson said heroes are people who save others. But I said that's not all heroes do. Sometimes heroes save themselves too." Sarah's hands stilled over the cutting board. "That's very wise, baby. I was talking about you. You saved Ghost, but you also had to save yourself from working too much." Sarah knelt down and pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. "You're right. And you know who taught me that? You did. You've been teaching me from the very beginning." That weekend, Sarah did something radical. She took 2 full days off. No work calls, no emails, no emergency meetings. Just her, Sophie, Ghost, and Justice at a lake cabin Marcus had offered them. They hiked, played in the water, roasted marshmallows, and talked about everything except rescue work. Sophie laughed more than Sarah had heard in months. Ghost and Justice romped like puppies, their old bodies remembering youth. And Sarah felt herself healing in ways she hadn't known she needed. On their last morning at the cabin, Sophie was throwing sticks for the dogs when she turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to keep doing this, helping dogs and people." "You already are, baby." "No, I mean really doing it. Like making it my job." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "You can be anything you want. I want to be like you. And like Ghost. Someone who doesn't give up on things everyone else gives up on." Later that day, driving home through the mountains, Sarah thought about legacy. Not the organization or the book or the legislation, those were important, but they weren't the real legacy. The real legacy was Sophie. A child who'd learned that one person could make a difference, that worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, that love was sometimes the bravest thing you could offer. That was what would outlast everything else. When they got back to town, there was an envelope waiting at their apartment. Inside was a letter from a woman named Patricia in Oregon. "Dear Sarah and Sophie, I saw your story on the news 2 years ago. At the time, I was planning to end my life. I'd lost my husband, my job, my home. I felt worthless. Then I saw a 6-year-old girl pay $1 for a dog everyone else called worthless, and something in me shifted. If that dog deserved a second chance, maybe I did too. I'm writing to tell you I got help. I adopted a senior dog from a shelter. Nobody wanted him because he was old and sick. His name is Charlie. We've been healing each other for 18 months now. I'm getting married next month to a wonderful man I met at a veterans support group. Charlie will be our ring bearer. You saved a dog. That dog's story saved me. And now I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying that forward. Thank you for teaching me that worth isn't measured in dollars." Sarah read the letter aloud to Sophie, her voice breaking on every other word. By the end, they were both crying. "We helped her," Sophie whispered, "even though we never met her. That's how it works, baby. One act of kindness creates ripples. We can't see how far they spread, but they keep going." The next day at this warehouse, Sarah gathered everyone for an announcement. We've successfully placed 287 dogs in the past 8 months. 13 more are pending adoption. We're ahead of schedule, under budget, and exceeding every metric the DoD gave us. Cheers erupted. Sarah held up her hand. But that's not why I called this meeting. I want to read you something. She read Patricia's letter. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. This is why we do this work, Sarah said. Not for the numbers or the contracts or the recognition. We do it because saving one soul, dog or human, creates ripples we can't even imagine. Every dog we rescue, every family we match, every life we touch, it spreads. And somewhere out there, someone we'll never meet is being saved by our work. Marcus stood up. I think we need to rename our expansion program. Not Dogs with Purpose Ripple Effect. Because that's what this is. The vote was unanimous again. Within 6 months, Ripple Effect had placed over 50 dogs with at-risk youth veterans with PTSD and families in crisis. The success rate was astounding. 93% of placements were thriving, and the remaining 7% had been rehomed successfully with better matches. National media attention returned, but this time, Sarah was ready. She gave interviews on her terms, always with Sophie beside her, always bringing the focus back to the dogs and the people they served. One interview stood out. A journalist asked Sophie, now 8 years old, "What would you say to people who think rescue work is too hard, too expensive, too risky?" Sophie looked directly at the camera. "I would say that I was 6 years old with $1 and I changed everything. So what's your excuse?" The clip went viral. Within a week, donations poured in from across the world. People sent dollar bills with notes, "My dollar for another ghost, for the next rescue," because worth isn't measured in price tags. Sarah kept every single dollar bill in a shadow box in the warehouse office, a reminder of where it all started. 2 years after the federal contract began, Sarah received another call from Colonel Hayes. The program's been such a success that Congress is authorizing expansion to all military working dogs, not just retirees. Active duty dogs who are injured or develop PTSD can now be transitioned to civilian therapy work instead of being euthanized. That's incredible. It's because of you. Because Sophie paid $1 for a dog, and you turned that dollar into a movement. After hanging up, Sarah went to find Ghost. He was in his usual spot at the warehouse, lying near the intake area where new dogs arrived, his presence calming them. He was 9 years old now, gray around the muzzle, moving slower but still sharp, still purposeful. Justice had passed peacefully in his sleep 6 months ago, just slipped away after a day of playing with Sophie. They'd buried him at the cabin with full honors. Ghost had grieved, but he'd also endured, because that's what soldiers did. Sarah sat beside him on the floor. You know what you did right. You changed the world, not by being perfect or undamaged or easy. You changed it by surviving, by letting us love you, by showing everyone that broken doesn't mean worthless. Ghost's tail thumped, and he rested his head on her lap. That evening, Sophie's school held a special assembly. They were unveiling a new program. Every third-grade class would spend a semester learning about compassion through animal rescue with visits from Second Chance canine dogs. Sophie was asked to speak as the program's inspiration. She stood at the podium, barely tall enough to reach the microphone, and spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already changed the world before turning 9. When I was 6, I saw a dog that everyone said was worth only $1. But I knew they were wrong. I knew he was worth everything. And now, because we didn't give up on him, hundreds of other dogs have been saved. Thousands of people have been helped. And all of it started with one choice: to see worth where others saw nothing. She paused, looking out at the crowd of students, teachers, and parents. You all have $1. Maybe it's real money, or maybe it's kindness, or time, or attention. But you have something you can give to make the world better. The question is, will you give it? Or will you walk away like everyone else? The assembly erupted in applause. That night, tucking Sophie into bed with Ghost on the floor beside them, Sarah felt something she'd been chasing for 3 years finally settle into place. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. There would always be more dogs to save, more battles to fight, more moments of doubt and exhaustion. but peace in knowing that they'd done something that mattered, that Sophie's one act of faith had created waves that would ripple forward long after they were gone. "Mommy?" Sophie's voice was sleepy. "Do you think Daddy knows about Ghost?" Sarah had answered this question a dozen times, but tonight felt different. "I know he does." "How do you know?" "Because wherever he is, he can see you. And what you've done with that dollar, the lives you've saved, the hope you've given people, that's exactly what he would have wanted. You honored his sacrifice by refusing to accept that anything or anyone is worthless." Sophie smiled and closed her eyes. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, baby. More than all the stars." After Sophie fell asleep, Sarah stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, dogs were sleeping in warm beds instead of cold cages. Veterans were finding purpose through four-legged companions who understood trauma without words. Children were learning that compassion could change the world, and it all started with a 6-year-old girl who'd seen a broken soldier dog and whispered, "He has my daddy's eyes." Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from Patricia in Oregon, now a regular correspondent. "Charlie and I just visited a school to talk about senior dog adoption. 3 families committed to adopting older dogs. The ripples keep spreading." Sarah smiled and typed back, "That's what heroes do. They create more heroes." She looked at Ghost peacefully sleeping now, his scarred body finally at rest. He'd been bought for $1, marked for death, written off as worthless. And he'd sparked a revolution, not through perfection, but through perseverance. Not by being unbroken, but by showing that broken things could still be beautiful, still be purposeful, still be worth saving. Sarah thought about Michael, about David Torres, about all the soldiers who'd given everything and all the dogs who'd fought beside them. They'd sacrificed for a world they believed could be better. And maybe it could be. $1 at a time. One dog at a time. One act of stubborn, ridiculous, world-changing love at a time. Sarah turned off the light and climbed into bed, Ghost's steady breathing. A lullaby that promised tomorrow would come and they would face it together. Because worth was never about the price tag. It was about the choice to see value where others saw nothing. And that choice, that one simple, profound choice, had changed everything.